I was a babysitter for exactly one night. By the time the parents came home, I'd broken 3 of their 7 rules, and I finally understood why the rules existed at all. I've tried to tell this story before, once to a friend, once to a therapist who didn't ask follow-up questions after, and once out loud to myself in a parking lot at 2 in the morning. None of those tellings felt right. This one might not either. I took one babysitting job in my life. One, because I needed $300 and a woman named Lena Peterson had posted on a neighborhood app with that exact number. I drove out to a part of town where the houses had names instead of numbers, rang a doorbell the size of my fist, and by the end of the night I understood something I have never been able to unknow. The rules made sense eventually. That's the worst part. They made complete sense. The Peterson estate sat at the end of a cul-de-sac that didn't appear on my GPS until I was already on it, like the street existed only if you already knew to look. The house was enormous. Not celebrity enormous, but old money enormous, the kind of scale designed to communicate that the people inside have never once worried about a utility bill. Every window was lit, floor-to-ceiling glass across the whole front face, warm light flooding out onto a lawn that looked freshly raked at dusk on a Tuesday, which, I remember thinking, was a strange choice of priorities. A black car idled in the circular drive, engine running, exhaust curling up into the cold. Someone was in a hurry to leave. I told myself that was normal. People are always in a hurry. Reeve Peterson opened the door before I knocked. I had my hand raised and he was just there. He was tall, tailored suit at 7 on a weeknight, a gold watch that caught the porch light when he reached out his hand to shake mine. The handshake was too firm, the kind that's a demonstration rather than a greeting, and he held it 1 beat longer than necessary. He said his name like it was a credential, smiled the exact right amount, and then stopped smiling the exact right amount. Everything about him was calibrated. The suit, the timing, the way he stepped back to let me in. And I remember feeling the very specific discomfort of realizing I was being processed rather than met. He said, "Damian's in the living room. He's in one of his quiet moods tonight." I didn't ask what the other moods were. Lena came out of the hallway behind him, silver necklace, a dress that was too nice for a Tuesday, hair pulled back so tight it looked like a decision. Her smile arrived a half-second after it should have, like it had to travel some distance to reach her face. She said it was so good of me to come on short notice, and the word good landed a little wrong, a little formal. Then she reached past Reeve and pressed a laminated card into my hand before I had even put my bag down, before I'd taken my coat off. I hadn't asked for it. She had clearly been holding it, waiting. The card was warm from her palm. I remember that specifically. The warmth of it, and how that warmth felt wrong coming off something laminated, something pre-printed, something that had clearly been made in advance. The first 2 rules were fine. No screens after 10, dinner by 7:30, the kind of thing you'd expect from organized parents. Rule 3 gave me my first pause. Don't let Damian go upstairs after 9 under any circumstances. I figured stairs, kid, injury, I could rationalize that. Rule 4, don't answer the landline if it rings twice and then stops. I read that one twice. Who puts a phone rule on a babysitting card? Rule 5 was the containers in the fridge, sealed. Do not open them under any circumstances, which, sure, no touching the leftovers, fine. Rule 6, do not let him face a mirror after dark. And I remember standing in that foyer, card in hand, coat still on, thinking, these are not the rules of a worried parent. These are the rules of someone who has learned them. There is a difference. I just didn't understand it yet. Rule 7 was at the bottom, separated from the others by a small gap, like whoever wrote it had needed a moment before putting it down. Never look directly at Damian when he is completely still. That was it. No, for safety reasons. No explanation in parentheses. No asterisk pointing to a footnote that would make it make sense. 7 words, 8 if you count completely as doing real work, which I decided it was. I stood there, and I read it a second time because I was certain I'd misread it. I hadn't. I remember looking up from the card at Lena, trying to catch something in her face. An apology, a laugh, Some signal that this was a joke or an eccentricity she was embarrassed about. She was already looking somewhere else. That should have told me something. Reeve called out, "Damian, come say hello," loud enough to carry through the house, conversational, the tone of a man accustomed to being heard without raising his voice. I turned toward the living room to see a child trotting in, the way kids do, curious and loose-limbed. Instead, Damian was already on the couch. Already there, already seated, already still, like he'd been there for hours and the room had been built around him. He was small for 8, dark-eyed, wearing a plain gray shirt and dark trousers that seemed overly formal for a child at home. His hands were in his lap. He was facing a muted television, some nature documentary playing without sound, and he was not watching it the way kids watch TV. He was facing it. There's a difference. He didn't turn when his father called. He didn't acknowledge the sound at all. He just sat, and the room felt quieter for it. I caught the moment Lena's composure slipped. It was small, less than a second, but I was looking right at her when it happened. Her gaze went past me, into the living room, and the blood left her face. Not dramatically, not like the movies, just a quiet draining, like something had been confirmed rather than discovered. Then Reeve put his hand on her elbow, and she pulled herself back together so fast I could almost pretend I hadn't seen it. She looked at me and said the food was in the fridge, their number was on the counter, the rules were self-explanatory. The smile was back, but it was working harder now. Reeve was already moving toward the door. Neither of them called goodbye to their son. Not a wave, not a "be good," nothing. I noticed. I filed it away and told myself some families are just not demonstrative. The door closed and I stood there with my hand still touching the knob. I don't know why I left my hand on it. Maybe some part of me thought they'd come back, knock twice, admit this was a strange joke. The car was already moving. I could hear the tires on the drive, then the street, then nothing. The house was very quiet. These big houses have a particular quiet, insulated, sealed, the kind of silence that feels like something is holding its breath rather than just the absence of sound. I turned around and the foyer felt larger than it had 60 seconds ago. The laminated card was still in my hand. I folded it and put it in my back pocket. I didn't think I needed to keep it out because I had already convinced myself, standing there alone in that marble foyer, that I was the kind of person who read the rules and absorbed them and didn't need reminders. That was the first mistake. I went to the living room and tried every opener I had. I asked Damian his grade at school. Nothing. I asked if he had a favorite show, gesturing at the TV. And he didn't move, didn't flicker, just sat there with his hands in his lap. I told him my name, said he could call me Drift, said that was a nickname. He didn't have to use it. I asked if he was hungry. I sat down on the arm of the couch, not too close, and tried the easy ones. Dogs or cats, superheroes. Did he want to pick something to watch? Every question went into him and didn't come back. It wasn't shy. Shy kids fidget, glance at the floor, go pink. Damian did none of those things. He was simply absent from the exchange, the way a piece of furniture is absent from a conversation. Except he was breathing. I could see that from where I sat, just barely. I went to the kitchen because it's what I do when I don't know what else to do. I find a task. Kitchens are legible. You open the fridge, you find something reasonable, you bring it out. And the act of feeding someone creates a small, normal shape around an uncomfortable silence. The Peterson fridge was enormous, clean, almost empty in the way expensive fridges can be. A few bottles of sparkling water, cold pizza in a box, and on the middle shelf, 4 sealed containers. Tupperwares, the good kind, labeled in black marker, but the labels were initials I didn't recognize. I read Rule 5 in my head. The containers, do not open. I didn't open them. I told myself I wasn't tempted. I was a little tempted, not to eat anything, just to see, just to understand what about leftovers required a rule. I grabbed the milk and the pizza and let the door swing shut. I set the milk and a plate of pizza on the coffee table, sat down on the far end of the couch from Damian, and exhaled for the first time since the front door closed. 2 hours, maybe less. The Petersons seemed like the type to keep a schedule. Damian hadn't moved. Same position, hands in lap, facing the silent TV, and the pizza sat between us, unclaimed. I unlocked my phone and started a text to a friend that I never sent because in that moment the screen lit up. Lena Peterson, calling, less than 10 minutes after she'd left. I remember thinking that was odd. I answered immediately, because of course I did, and in the half second before she spoke, I could hear the sound of a car interior, road noise, the precise silence of someone choosing their words. Lena's voice on the line was careful the way a surgeon is careful, precise, controlled, no motion wasted. She asked if I had read the rules. I said yes. She said, "And I'm going to remember this exact phrasing forever, all of them, or just most of them." Not a question. I said all of them, and she said good, and then she said they were not suggestions. They were not the nervous preferences of particular parents, and I should treat them as I would treat a fire exit plan. Information that seems unnecessary until the moment it is the only information that matters. I said, of course, yes, absolutely, the way you do when someone is making you feel like you've done something wrong that you're not sure you've done yet. The call dropped before I could respond. I looked at the phone. I looked back at Damian. He hadn't moved. He hadn't touched the pizza. I sat there with the dead call in my hand, and the rules suddenly feeling much heavier in my pocket than they had before. He hadn't touched the milk. He hadn't touched the pizza. The ice in the glass had started to sweat, and I couldn't remember pouring ice. I didn't think I had. I looked at Damian and tried to work out how long he'd been in that exact position. Same angle, same hands flat on his thighs, same half-open mouth. The thing was, I hadn't seen him sit down. I'd walked in from the hallway, he'd been on the couch, and I'd just accepted it. The way you accept furniture. I tried to backtrack through the last 20 minutes and kept running into a wall. I genuinely could not tell you when the boy had last moved. Then the landline rang. One of those old wall mounts in the kitchen. I hadn't even noticed it on the way in. It rang twice, then stopped. I stood there and stared at the arch between the rooms, and I could see the phone from where I was sitting, just barely, the receiver on its cradle. I knew the rule. I had read it twice. And I want to be honest about why I went anyway. I told myself it was probably the Petersons, that they'd tried my cell and the signal dropped, that this was just a backup plan, and I'd feel stupid if I missed something important. That's what I told myself. I picked it up. No voice. Just breathing. Slow, even. Like someone on the other end who had all the time in the world and knew it. I said hello. I said it again. On the third hello, I heard something that might have been a shift, a settling, the sound a person makes when they get comfortable. Then the line went dead. I stood with the receiver in my hand for a moment and made myself put it back carefully, not slam it, carefully, because some part of me didn't want to make noise. I turned around and walked back toward the living room, and I told myself, wrong number. That was all. Just someone's wrong number. Slow and breathing and patient, at 9:15 on a Tuesday. Damian was in a different chair. I know how that sounds. I walked back through the arch and the cream couch, the couch I had watched him sit on for the better part of an hour, was empty. He was in the wingback chair by the far window, same posture, same hands on his thighs, same angle of the head. The TV was still on, still muted, still throwing blue light across his face, except now it was throwing it from a different direction. I stood in the kitchen arch and I made myself count the chairs in the room, slowly, like maybe I'd just miscounted the furniture earlier. I hadn't. He was definitely not in the chair he'd been in before. I sat back down on the couch and opened my phone. That was my move. Just get on my phone, look busy, give my brain something to do so it'd stop offering me explanations I didn't want. I pulled up a group chat and started typing something I'd never send, just to have my thumbs moving. Damian didn't look at me. He was facing the TV. Everything was fine. The house was warm, the hallway light was on, I had a thick envelope of cash coming to me in a few hours, and the boy had simply gotten up and moved chairs while I was in the kitchen, and I had not heard him do it. Kids do that. They move. That was the story, and I was committing to it. The hallway light flickered. I heard it before I saw it. That faint, electrical tick a bulb makes when it's about to give out. And I looked up, and the light at the end of the hall was going, steadying, going again. Rule 3 said, don't turn off the hallway light. It didn't say anything about flickering. I walked over and pressed the switch once, just to reseat it, the way you do when a lamp is loose in its socket. That's all I was doing, reseating it. The flicker stopped. I stood there a moment looking down the long corridor toward the staircase, which was dark, and something about the darkness at the top of those stairs felt different than before. More deliberate, maybe, like it was waiting. I turned back toward the living room. Damian was completely still in the wingback chair, which I'd expected. That was normal now. That was just how he was. Except he wasn't looking at the TV. He was looking at me. Not glancing over. Not reacting to my movement in the hall. Just looking directly at me with the same expression he'd had all night, which was no expression at all. My brain did something strange in that moment. It tried to decide whether he'd turn to look when he heard me move, whether this was just a kid noticing his babysitter come back into the room. That would have been normal. I almost sold myself on it. Almost. I looked directly at him. I want to be clear. I know I did it. I'm not going to pretend I tripped into it. I looked because I needed to know if what I was seeing was real, and I think some part of me believed that if I just looked squarely at him, he'd blink or shift or do something a child does. He didn't. His eyes were on me, had been on me, and the thing I couldn't explain, the thing that I've tried to explain to myself in the years since, is that his eyes didn't move to find mine. There was no adjustment, no tiny reflex of a gaze landing. They were already there. Like they'd been there the whole time and it was me who had finally caught up. My phone rang. The sound was so normal, so aggressively ordinary, a ringtone I'd downloaded because I thought it was funny, that I actually flinched. I looked down. The screen said Peterson. I looked back up. Damian was facing the TV, pizza still untouched, milk still sweating. Like the last 30 seconds had been a misread, a trick of the light. My brain doing what brains do in empty houses at night. I answered before it could go to voicemail. I stepped back into the hallway, keeping him in my line of sight through the arch, and I pressed the phone to my ear and said hello in a voice that was almost steady. Almost. Lena's voice was different. On the first call, she had been careful. That particular careful of someone who has practiced keeping things out of their voice. This was not that. This was the voice underneath the careful, and it was frightened. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how the night was going. She asked how many rules I had broken, quietly, like the number already existed, and she just needed me to confirm it. I started to say, none. The reflex answer, the defensive answer, and then I stopped because I thought about what the answer needed to be for both of us, and I told the truth instead. I said 3. I walked her through them. The containers. I said I hadn't actually opened them, I'd just moved them, looked at the labels, and she exhaled in a way that told me that mattered. The landline. And then the looking. When I said, and I looked at him, I looked directly at him when he was still. Lena didn't speak for 3 full seconds. I counted. I was standing in the kitchen and I counted the seconds in my head because it was something to do with the silence. When she came back, her voice had gone flat, not angry, past angry, and she asked me if his eyes had moved when I met them. I told her they hadn't. She said, no, they wouldn't. He already knows. That was the first thing she said when the silence broke. Stay in the light. Every light in the room, turn them all on. Do not let him see that you are afraid. We are coming home right now. I started to ask what she meant by, he already knows. Knows what? Knows that I looked. Knows something about me. But she had already hung up. I stood in the kitchen holding a dead phone, and the hallway light was steady above me, and I could hear the TV in the other room. Still muted, still on. And I understood with a clarity I did not want that the rules were not about managing an anxious child. Every one of them was learned. Someone had broken each rule before me and told the Petersons what happened. That was the only explanation that made sense. I walked back to the living room and I turned on every lamp I could find. The floor lamp behind the couch, the reading light on the side table, the overhead I hadn't touched all night. The room went from dim blue to full, flat white, and I sat down at the far end of the couch. Not close to him, but in the light, visible, exactly where Lena had told me to be. I started talking. Not about anything. I said something about the TV show that wasn't playing, about whether he had a preference, about the weather, about nothing. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands in my lap. The envelope of cash was going to be worth every single second of this, I told myself. And then I realized I hadn't agreed on an amount, and the Petersons had never mentioned one, and somehow that scared me more than anything else had all night. And then Damian spoke. One sentence. He didn't turn his head, just delivered it into the middle distance, to the dark television screen, in a voice so flat it took me a second to register it as language at all. You looked. That was it. 2 words. I'd been running on adrenaline and forced calm for the last 40 minutes, and those 2 words cut through all of it, because he wasn't accusing me. He wasn't upset. He was just stating a fact, the way you'd note the weather, the way something would note it if it needed to track that kind of thing. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. That came out of my mouth before I'd decided to say it. An apology, to an 8-year-old. I heard how small it sounded the moment it left me, small and papery and completely hollow, and I hated myself a little for it. But I couldn't unsay it, and I couldn't get up and leave because I'd checked. The Petersons hadn't left a car, my rideshare would take 18 minutes, and I was not going to stand outside in the dark by myself. So I sat there, hands folded in my lap like I was in a waiting room, watching my knees, not him, staying in the light exactly the way Lena had told me, like that was still something I could get right. 20 minutes followed. I know it was 20 because I watched the clock on my phone, which I held face up in my lap so the screen would give me something to focus on that wasn't him. Damian did not move, did not blink that I saw, did not reach for the pizza or the milk which had gone warm and flat-looking on the coffee table between us. I filled the silence the way Lena told me, kept talking, kept my voice even, described the plot of a movie I half remembered, talked about nothing at all. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. And then the headlights came, 2 hard beams crossing the wall left to right, and I think I made a sound I am not proud of. Relief. Pure and animal. The Petersons' car was in the driveway. Reeve came in first. He didn't look at me. He walked directly to Damian, crouched to the boy's level for a single moment, then straightened and took Damian's hand, and Damian stood and went with him the way water goes downhill, frictionless, immediate, not a word between them. No, how was your evening? No, say goodnight to the babysitter. Reeve led him to the staircase and they went up together, and I watched their backs the whole way, Reeve's shoulders rigid, Damian's hand small inside his, until the hallway swallowed them. The hallway light held steady. It had held steady since I'd touched that switch, and I didn't know if that mattered, but I noticed it. Lena came in behind him and closed the door and stood in the foyer and looked at me the way someone looks at a car that made it across a flooded road. Tired. Grateful in a way that had nothing celebratory in it. She was holding an envelope. A real one. Letter-sized. Unsealed. And she pressed it into my hands with both of hers, and her hands were cold. I didn't open it there. I could feel the thickness through the paper. Whatever was inside was significantly more than the $60 we'd agreed on. She said, "You kept him calm. That's what matters." And her voice had all the warmth of someone reading from a script they'd had to memorize the hard way. I asked her anyway. I don't know why. I knew she wouldn't tell me, I could feel that. But I asked, "What is he?" She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She said, "Don't come back." And she opened the door. That was it. Not an answer, not a non-answer. A boundary, solid as a wall. I stepped through the door onto the porch, and the night air hit me, and I realized I'd been holding my breath for probably 20 minutes straight, breathing in shallow little sips without knowing it. The envelope was still in my hand. I didn't look back. I told myself I wasn't going to look back. I looked back. Of course I did. It was instinct. The same instinct that makes you check a dark room before you leave it. And through the window beside the door, I could see the foyer, the staircase, the hallway light. And at the top of the stairs, Damian, standing exactly the way he'd sat all night, perfectly still, facing the window, facing me, at the distance and angle where he should not have been able to pick out my face in the dark, but I had the absolute, unshakable certainty that he could. That he had, the moment I turned. His expression was what it had always been. Nothing. Not watching me, not threatening me, just aware of me, the way a camera is aware of a room. I ran, not a jog, not a brisk walk. I ran down the porch steps to my car, got in, and backed out without checking any of my mirrors, which is something I had never done in my life. I drove out of that suburb and onto the main road, and I kept going until the streetlights changed from the amber sodium of that neighborhood to the whiter, harder lights of the highway, and by then my hands had stopped shaking enough that I trusted myself to exist in traffic. I didn't play music. I didn't call anyone. I drove home in silence, and I sat in my parked car for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I never called the Petersons, never filed anything, never told anyone in a way that counted. I tried to write it down once, about a week later, and I got 3 sentences in and stopped, because on the page it looked like nothing. Quiet child, strange rules, a phone call, a breathing landline. That's all it was on paper. That's all it would ever be to anyone who hadn't been in that room, under that lamp, watching him not move. I still have the Petersons' number in my phone. I've never deleted it. I don't know why. Maybe because deleting it feels like pretending the night didn't happen, and I'm not quite able to do that. 6 weeks later, I drove past their street on the way back from somewhere else. I didn't plan it, or I told myself I didn't. New car in the driveway, a smaller sedan, not the Petersons. Through the living room window, I could see someone moving around, young, easy in their body, the kind of easy you have when you haven't read anything yet and everything still makes sense. They were carrying something, maybe a glass, maybe a phone, moving through the Petersons' living room like it was any house. I didn't stop. I slowed, briefly, and then I kept driving, and I told myself that whatever happened in that house was not my problem anymore. Then I looked up at Damian's window. I don't know what made me. The light was on. The same warm rectangle I'd seen from inside, just reversed now, seen from the street. And his silhouette was there. Small, centered in the window, completely still. I was doing maybe 20 miles an hour, and I had already passed the house, and I still knew, the way I'd known on the porch, that he was looking at the car. Not at traffic. At my car, specifically, moving away from him. The same awareness. The same nothing expression I couldn't see from here but knew was there. I pressed the accelerator down. I still think about the rules, not with fear exactly, more like the way you think about a lock you once saw on a door and never found out what was behind it. The rules weren't for Damian. That's what I understand now sitting here, enough time later that I can say it plainly. They weren't to manage him or help him or contain some diagnosis. They were the record of every mistake every previous sitter made, written down so the next one had a chance. How many sitters does it take to compile 7 rules? How long had the Petersons been doing this? I don't know. I never will. But that light was on in his window, and somewhere inside that house a new person was moving around like it was just a house, and the rules were on the counter, and the night was just beginning. When Drift drives past that house at the end and sees the light on in Damian's room, do you think the new sitter already broke a rule? Or do you think Damian let them believe they hadn't?